This is part 2 of my video on the history of the Kingdom of Gwynedd, one of the most important states in the history of Wales. You don't have to watch these parts in order, but if you like this video, I would definitely recommend part 1. When we last left off, the Kingdom of Gwynedd under Rhodri Mawr had just been divided upon his death. His eldest son, Anarald, inherited this newly partitioned Gwynedd, and avenged his father's death in 881 by crushing the Saxons in a battle near Conwy. Speaking of the Anglo-Saxons, Aethelstan had just become their first king. The new king of Gwynedd, Idwal, and his neighbour to the south, Hywel accepted the overlordship of Aethelstan. This was until 942, following his death, Idwal Voel rebelled against the new king of England, Edmund I. Idwal and his brother met Edmund in battle and were killed. His sons, Iago and Eab, were supposed to inherit the throne, but they were driven out by the king of Deheubarth, Hywel. Hywel died around 950, giving the perfect opportunity for the exiled sons of the previous king to retake Gwynedd. Iago and Eab met the sons of Hywel in a battle at Nant Carno, defeated them, and took back Gwynedd and Powys. They ruled their new kingdom as co-kings until 969, when Iago imprisoned Eab and ruled Gwynedd by himself. This lasted for 10 years, after which Hywel, the son of the imprisoned king Eab, captured his uncle Iago and became the sole king of Gwynedd. Hywel died in 985. His throne was contested by his brother Cadwallon and his cousin Ionaval. Cadwallon managed to defeat Ionaval in battle, but only a year later he himself would be killed by the new ruler of Deheubarth, Merdydd ab Owain. Merdydd died in the year 999, and sometime later his kingdom was taken over by Eitham, a man whose ancestry is completely unknown and probably wasn't related to any of the royal families. Back in Gwynedd, the son of the former king Hywel, Sinan, had managed to retake his lands. However, he only ruled it for 3 years before being defeated by Eitham, bringing Gwynedd under the rule of Deheubarth once again. Despite ruling over most of Wales, Eitham's rule would be ultimately inconsequential. He and his 4 sons would be killed in the year 1018 by Llywelyn ap Saesys, who was the great-grandson of the previously mentioned King Anarald. Llywelyn decided to break the long-standing tradition of dying violently to external forces, and instead seemingly died peacefully after a short rule in the year 1023. His succession was interrupted, however, as King Meredydd's cousin, Rhodri, managed to seize the throne following his death. That was until 1033, when he was killed by the Irish, which allowed Iago ab Idwal, the great-grandson of the previous King Idwal, to take the throne. The Irish chronicles tell us that he was killed by his own soldiers a mere 6 years later. This allowed the ambitious son of Llywelyn ap Saesys, Gruffydd, to finally claim his inheritance and become the King of Gwynedd. Gruffydd acted upon his ambition almost immediately, and by the year 1043 he had successfully conquered all of Deheubarth from Gruffydd ap Rhydderch. Sometime later, most likely between 1045 and 1052, Gruffydd successfully conquered Morgannwg, and became the first Welsh king to rule over all of Wales. In 1052, Gruffydd attacked England and succeeded in taking Hereford. This victory would mark the beginning of 10 years of peace in Wales, but all come to an end when Harold Godwinson, future disputed King of England, got permission from the king to invade Gruffydd's realm. The King of Wales was pushed back to Snowdonia, where he was killed by his own soldiers who hoped that his death would bring peace with England. Harold Godwinson divided Wales once again. Gwynedd was given to a man named Bleddyn ap Cynfyn, who was the son of the second husband of the daughter of King Meredydd ab Owain, who herself was the first wife to King Llywelyn ap Saesys. He agreed to submit to Harold Godwinson, the most powerful man in England, securing his position with a powerful ally who will surely be around for a long time. He apparently ruled as a very dutiful and just king, and his murder by the King of Deheubarth in 1075 would be seen as a brutal crime. He would be succeeded by Trehearn ap Caradog, a man from Arwystli who claimed to be Bleddyn's cousin, even though he wasn't. However, he was very unpopular in western Gwynedd, which gave an excellent opportunity for a new king to enter the scene. Gruffydd Ŵyr Iago was the son of Sinan and Ragnhilda, the daughter of the King of Dublin. Gruffydd's father was completely unknown, but his father, Iago, was a king, leading Gruffydd to style himself in a very unique way. Rather than being Gruffydd, son of Sinan, he called himself Gruffydd, grandson of Iago. Although he successfully drove Trehearn back to Arustley, he would be defeated when attempting to retake Rhuddlan. He was also unpopular due to his Irish soldiers, who apparently had very foreign customs, leading him to eventually being overthrown by Trehearn and driven back to Wexford, making him an exile, pretender, king and exile again all in 1 year. Trehearn would rule for 6 years, until the peace was disturbed by his ally, Caradog ap Gruffydd, king of Morgannwg, who decided to invade Deheubarth. Gruffydd ŵr Iago had returned from Ireland and landed near St. David's in support of his friend. Gruffydd and Rhys ap Tudor Mawr of Deheubarth would face off against Trehearn ap Caradog of Gwynedd, Caradog ap Gruffydd of Morgannwg, and Maelor ap Rhiwallon of Powys in the Battle of Mynydd Carn. Maelor, Caradog and Trehearn would all be killed in battle, allowing Gruffydd to become the King of Gwynedd once again. Unfortunately, Gruffydd's victory would not last long. Shortly after the battle, he was captured by the Earl of Chester. The Domesday Book, recorded in 1086, shows us the dire situation in Gwynedd at this time, with the Earldom of Chester being recorded as extending up to the Clwyd, and the Earl of Chester being in control of Rhufeiniog and Ross. The Normans continued to establish a tighter control over Wales until 1094, when Cadogan ap Leddyn led a revolt with his brothers and successfully defeated the Norman army at Coed as Powys. Gruffydd ŵr Iago escaped from prison and re-established himself as the King of Gwynedd. 4 years later, the Normans invaded again and pushed all the way to the Menai, until a stroke of good luck happened. King Magnus of Norway was leading a force to raid the Menai coasts. He encountered the currently victorious Norman army and killed the Earl of Shrewsbury. Gruffydd would not expand his realm for 20 years, until he eventually retook the land to the Clwyd once again, and he also took Meirionydd. Gruffydd appears to have retired his throne in 1120, leaving the kingship of Gwynedd to his 2 sons, Cadwallon, who would be killed in Powys in 1132, and Owain Gwynedd. In 1136, Gruffydd ap Rhys led a revolt against the Normans. He and Owain Gwynedd would defeat the House of Clare in the Battle of Crug Mawr, and Owain would annex all of Ceredigion. England at this time was pretty chaotic, rather anarchic you could say. While they were busy arguing whether or not it'd be a good idea to have a king called Steve, Owain was taking advantage of the new weakness of the Marcher Lords. In 1146, he captured Mold Castle, not to be confused with my house, which is more of a mold fortress. And 3 years later, he annexed the Commote of Yal, extending his realm up to the city of Chester. Ceredigion was lost to Deheubarth in 1153, and in 1157, Henry II, the new King of England, invaded. Owain managed to rebuff Henry at first. He defeated his army at Basingstoke and his naval landings on Anglesey. However, it was very apparent to Owain that he could not hold out forever. He agreed to cede Tyrgeinil to Henry, but succeeded in keeping all his other gains. This setback would be only temporary. In the year 1163, Henry II would lose widespread public support following his quarrel with Archbishop Becket, which gave Owain an opportunity to take back his lost land. He joined forces with the kings of Powys and Deheubarth and met the English army at Corwin. The Welsh blocked the passage, so Henry decided to march his army straight up the mountainside. The heavy rain and mud made supply difficult, and the lack of food and abundance of hostile terrain eventually forced Henry to withdraw back to England. Owain died in 1170, but his eldest surviving son was deemed unfit to succeed him due to his physical deformity. Instead, it appears that Gwynedd was fragmented, with his next son in line, Dafydd, ruling Prefeddwlad, the Middle Country, Cynan inheriting Dynoding and Meirionydd, and Maelgwn taking Anglesey. Dafydd and his brother Rhodri took Anglesey in 1173, and a year later took further lands to consolidate Gwynedd. In a bid to centralise his power, Dafydd arrested his brother in 1175. However, he soon escaped and led a rebellion against him. Dafydd was forced to agree to another partition of Gwynedd, with Rhodri receiving everything west of the Conwy with the exception of Meirionydd and Dynoding, who went to the previous ruler's sons. Dafydd would rule for 20 years until he was defeated by the son of Iorwerth ap Owain, Llywelyn the Great. Rhodri would die in 1195, and his lands would be inherited by the sons of Cynan. Gruffydd ap Cynan died in 1200, and his brother took control of some of his lands, but he was defeated only 2 years later by Llywelyn and Hywel ap Gruffydd. Llywelyn swore allegiance to the new King of England, John, and married his daughter, Joan. His neighbour, Powys, had decided to split up, but unlike my parents, this time it wasn't my fault. Powys Gwynwynwyn, named after King Gwynwynwyn, decided to enter a win-win scenario. He had decided to attempt to attack the Norman lords in the south and lost. Llywelyn seized the opportunity to take his lands and at the same time took the cantref of Penwethig in Ceredigion. Despite getting along with John, Llywelyn would eventually be invaded by England in 1211. For the first time in over 100 years, the forces of England reached the banks of the Menai Strait. John's daughter, Joan, persuaded her father to not conquer all of Gwynedd, leaving Llywelyn in control of all lands west of the Conwy. This wouldn't last long, however. With the backing of both the Pope and France, Llywelyn rebelled against John and retook the Prefethelad. Meanwhile, several of John's barons were getting quite angry with him, enough to start a war perhaps. Several times maybe. Llywelyn participated in the First Barons' War and played a key part in their victory, particularly with his capture of Shrewsbury. He marched south and captured most of the Norman castles in Deheubarth, including Cardigan, Carmarthen and Swansea. He distributed these lands amongst the sons of Rhys ap Gruffydd. Powys Wenwynwyn was also seized, and Powys Vadog swore fealty to him. In 1231, in response to mounting border pressure from the Marcher lords, Llywelyn marched his army south, destroyed Neath and annexed the cantrefi of Beest, Gwytherion and Meilionydd. At this time he also adopted a new title, Prince of Aberfraw and Lord of Snowdon. Llywelyn successfully petitioned both the Welsh and English rulers to recognise his second son, Dafydd, as his legitimate heir. And on the 11th of April, 1240, Llywelyn Mawr died, leaving Gwynedd to his son and an uncertain fate. 6 weeks later, Henry III demanded that Dafydd return the lands that his father had conquered, reducing his domain to just Gwynedd. He also demanded that Gwynedd should pass to him in the event that Dafydd dies without an heir, and that Dafydd should surrender his elder brother, Gruffydd, to him. Gruffydd would serve as a potential rival to Dafydd, but this ended later following Gruffydd's fall to his death trying to escape from the Tower of London while lowering himself to the ground using sheets. Dafydd rebelled against Henry in the same year. He allied with the men of Deheubarth and his nephew Llywelyn ap Gruffydd. This would all be in vain, however, and in 1246 Dafydd would die without an heir, technically leaving Gwynedd to Henry III. But Henry could claim Gwynedd in name only. The Welsh acknowledged Dafydd's nephews Llywelyn and Owain ap Gruffydd as kings. They made peace with England in 1247 and once again ceded the Prefethelad and Meirionydd in the Treaty of Woodstock. Not that one. In 1255, Llywelyn managed to imprison his brother and became the sole ruler of Gwynedd, and in 1256 he pushed further forward and retook Prefethelad. By 1258, Llywelyn had defeated Henry III and reconquered Meirionydd, Powys Wenwynwyn, Beest, Gwytherion, and established his allies in Ceredigion and Ystrad Tywi. Powys Vadog had also sworn allegiance to him, and by 1262 Llywelyn had pushed further south to Meilionydd and Brecon. His conquests were confirmed by Henry III through the Treaty of Montgomery in 1267. Henry acknowledged Llywelyn as the Prince of Wales, and Llywelyn acknowledged Henry as his overlord. John Davies describes the Principality of Wales as having prospects and a bright future. The country was not an underdeveloped backwater, but rather a complex and structured society. There were churches built from English stone, and the rich drank French wine. Welsh cattle, timber and wool were exported. There were Welsh administrators, craftsmen, priests, poets, goldsmiths, doctors, and Welshmen went to university. What Wales didn't have was time. Henry III was dead, and his son Edward I had now returned to England to take his throne. Llywelyn refused to pay homage to him, arguing that his rights through the Treaty of Montgomery were being rejected. Edward refused to acknowledge the treaty, arguing that Llywelyn had unlawfully imprisoned and taken land from his brothers. In 1276, Edward marched into Wales with an army of around 16,000 soldiers, the largest seen on the island since 1066. He seized Anglesey and surrounded the Welsh in Snowdonia. With nowhere else to go, Llywelyn surrendered to Edward. He would retain the lands west of the Conwy. His brother Dafydd would receive Rhufeiniog and Dyffryn Clwyd. His brother Owain would receive Llyn, and Edward would annex Ross and Tygeinio. Edward's rule was oppressive and unwanted, with one of the major disputes being his dismissal of Welsh law. In 1282, Dafydd ap Gruffydd rose up in rebellion. He was joined by Llywelyn, 4 weeks later. The rebels attacked Hawarden, Ruthin, Aberystwyth and Builth, and they defeated the English both at Dynevor and the Menai Straits. This was, however, to be in vain. On the 11th of December 1282, Llywelyn, Prince of Wales, was leading an army to reinforce Builth. They encountered the English on the banks of the Irvine, and Llywelyn was killed, a soldier from Shrewsbury, who didn't even recognise he was in combat with the prince. Dafydd would continue the resistance for another 6 months, until he was finally captured, hanged, drawn and quartered. Edward would annex the Principality of Wales, and it would now be traditionally ruled by the heir to the English throne, bringing an end to the Kingdom of Gwynedd after 800 years. Thank you very much for watching.